Restorative discipline focuses on understanding the cause and effect of an infraction. This includes those directly involved and the larger community. Accountability in restorative discipline comes from understanding the impacts of individual actions and repairing any harm that occurred. This differs from traditional approaches in which accountability is achieved by determining guilt and imposing punishment. Restorative discipline is based on relationships and grounded in community.
The root word of discipline is disciple. And so disciple means to teach. When a student can't read, we teach. When a student doesn't understand content, we teach. When a student violates boundaries, we reteach our boundaries. And we're looking at ways of how we can give time and space for assessment like we do in our other curriculum. What we also go by is connect before correct. So how can I connect with the student before I actually correct them? Shared accountability and the communal accountability is we're all responsible for making this thing right. So it's just not on the student, it's the support, it's the parents, it's the community.
When students misbehave at school, traditional approaches to discipline say you should punish them to deter future offenses. A restorative approach to discipline focuses more on repairing the damage to those impacted rather than suspending or expelling students. Restorative justice programs encourage students to reflect on what happened, how to be accountable for their actions, and what needs to be different in the future. Suspensions and expulsions are used as a last resort and only for a specific purpose, such as safety or de-escalation. Keeping students learning in the classroom and ensuring equity for students of color and students with disabilities are the focus of restorative discipline processes and policies.
But how do we respond to behavior when there's about 7 to 10 different definitions and there's bias? You ever give a consequence and a teacher or another adult be like, that's all? That happens? Oh, I thought that was only in my world. Okay, that happens. Consequences are for you. So if I say that student didn't get enough, that means I wasn't satisfied by your response. It had nothing to do with that student being taught, retaught, and given time to practice new skills and tools.
That goes back to the conversation that we were having the other day as far as identity and how oftentimes when we suspend, it's about how you made me feel, and I'm gonna give you consequences based on how I feel, but not necessarily what's in the best interest of the child.
I understand the disciple and teaching, but we got those who just don't care. It's to the point where I would do everything before I suspend you, but at the same time, my time is just as valuable because everybody else needs me.
We get bleeding hearts thinking that, hey, we're doing too much, we're suspending kids here and there, because you have to be fair to the student that's trying to learn that can't get the opportunity because we're spending all day trying to teach Johnny and not trying to teach Michael, Mary, Sue, and everybody else.
RJ is not anti-suspension, right? We're not saying anti-accountability. We're not saying anti-exclusion. When we go back to the social discipline window, it's high accountability limit setting, right? We talk about limit setting on the axis, but then we have to talk about the support. So when that student ran out of time, how was that student re-enter back in the community, right? We have to look at what's the student's baseline. That majority of our students' baseline are all operating below zero, right? And so we have to understand to get that student to neutral, it's going to take a little bit of extra digging, a little extra time, a little extra of everything to get them on the same playing field.
I learned something that changed my whole perspective on how I engage with children. And it is that children test boundaries in the places that they feel the safest. And often for our kids, that is at school.
Being a teacher, I know the pedagogy of how to teach, and that's not something a lot of teachers are taught related to discipline. So expecting teachers to write lesson plans about behavior, a teacher couldn't write this. Like, we really struggled with this because it's not It's not something that we're taught. Teaching is a craft. If a principal comes into my classroom and he's got feedback about how I'm teaching, I consider that my job. I can take it, but when he's got feedback about how I'm treating the kids or there's lack of equity, that's personal, and it becomes an area of conflict.
So the question is, how does your school or how does your plan or how does your policy allow for teachers to be more equipped to have those conversations, because you are expected to execute these things. So you can't have this expectation without the skills and tools for yourself as well, right?
Restorative questions are the building blocks of restorative practices. Questions such as, what happened? What were you thinking and feeling? Who was impacted? What needs to be done to repair the harm?
The situation was a student concerned with how someone was talking to them. And so because in their environment, in their neighborhood, you can't say certain things to them. So instantly, that's not a part of the school culture, but that's a part of the neighborhood culture. So there was a clash, and the adults came together, the students came together, and we were able to hear all parties. And this stemmed from a previous training which introduced restorative justice. And it started with nonviolent communication. So what was the need that this student was trying to have met? And so then we did a timeline with this student. And then we had the other parties separately do their own timeline. And then we invited them together once it was a collective agreement that, hey, are you in the space to be able to have this conversation? When parties agreed to say yes, then we can revisit those timelines together and that they can look at it. It was impactful. But in the moment, it was very combustible, but after everybody said, oh, so you didn't really mean what you said, I interpreted it differently. I thought this, I thought that. And then they were like, oh, well, no, why would I do that? I don't even know you.
In pre-K, I got expelled for being very aggressive because I was being bullied at the time. So I was already getting the mindset, oh, if I do this way, they won't do nothing to me anymore. In this retreat, I've learned many different ways of restorative ways to understand others. I use a lot of coping skills, which they show you here, that you could talk it out, you could write it down, you could do many exercises with people so you could understand them and they could understand you. I think some students may want suspension because they think, oh, I'm not gonna come to school for something I did wrong. Maybe I should get suspended more. And so I'm like, I used to have that mindset too, where I'd be like, they say, oh, you're having suspension for 5 days. I'm like, okay, good. I'm not gonna come to school. And they'll be like, okay, now it's 3 days. I'm like, I'm still not gonna come. I feel like I really don't see a difference when students have gotten suspended. They seem the same. They don't see shame. They don't. In fact, they get honored more and they get more respect. Like, oh, you did this the wrong way and you're still coming back.
Well documented in DC that white students who have committed the same violations are giving more grace than students of color. So what RJ allows us to do is create a space where we can confront our biases. It's not about them committing the violation, it's about the fair process when those violations are committed. What is our response? Like, kids fighting in school is not a crime. It's a violation of policy and rules. But the misuse of, school resource officers to then interject or intervene into a fight where kids are probably going to be friends the next day is not an appropriate response. A lot of students come to school because it's safe. Our students are dealing with life a little bit differently than we may have experienced.
Restorative justice kind of makes space for them, and it says, hey, you're part of this community, you belong here. Maybe you made a mistake, but that's what, it's a school, you're here to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes.
I have students that have come back many years later and say, thank you for those moments, because I'm not receiving that anywhere else. You actually care.
Staff can be trained in a range of responsive and preventative practices that can be utilized with school staff, students, and community members.